You are listening to the Moments in Marketing podcast and its host, Dima Mackey, where fellow traditional and digital marketers share their stories along the way. This is the place where we will dive deeper into some of the strategies, processes, and ways to excel in your digital career. We all know that success stories do not come easy and overnight, so we'll try to get to the bottoms of it. Whether you're looking for how to get into the digital marketing industry, or launch your own project, or just want to learn from someone's experience, this is a great place to be. Stay tuned and enjoy.
So hey everyone, and this is Dima Mackey from Moments in Marketing podcast, and today I'm really excited to record my first episode with Ryan Glass from Omnicom Media Group New York, who's been working in digital marketing and SEO for the last 10 years. A little bit of background: me and Ryan have connected before due to some common SEO work we had to do for our clients, and he's been of a great help, and it's been a pleasure working and learning from him. I think Ryan's story is pretty remarkable, and I was always a strong believer, and still actually am, that one of the best ways to learn is to hear out exciting stories from other people. So thanks again, Ryan, for joining me today. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on. This is going to be a lot of fun. And you're right. I completely agree that hearing about how others started, generally in terms of a lot of people in our industry may have like imposter syndrome, and to just take a moment and think like, no, I know a lot of great stuff. I bring a unique perspective to marketing, not myself, but like each of us in marketing, and to hear about where others come from can be greatly rewarding in terms of just like understanding the different approaches that each other takes and how we can all come from different angles, but ideally we're working towards the same goals.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, just to start with a myriad of questions out there that I can ask you. The first would be pretty boring, but really important. So for those of you who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Sure, yeah. So as you highlighted, I currently work for Omnicom Media Group in the US. My title is Head of Content and SEO, which means I work with all of our US-based SEO teams across the network at our various different agencies that we have within Omnicom Media Group. And a lot of my role is working on new business pursuits and working on either creating new SEO products, new projects and deliverables, refining existing ones that we have, and spending a lot of time working with the teams that we have at the agencies in terms of how are they already doing some great work and continuing to refine and push things forward, and then help facilitate knowledge sharing across different work groups so that we can really have a sense of community across everybody who works in SEO. I feel like that's really central to how a lot of us sort of came up in the SEO industry, right? There's nothing where we're going to school or there's very few things where we're going to school or receiving a formal training. And a lot of it is based on learning neat and cool things that others in the industry have done, and then considering, would that work on my clients? And so helping to expedite that internally with what we're doing across the agency has been a really rewarding experience for me. And it builds on some of the things that I was doing before joining the agency side when I was in-house. I worked for a number of years for U-Haul International in various capacities. And then from 2011-ish to 2016, primarily in a digital marketing capacity, fluctuating at times between being SEO or analytics specialized and other times into more generalist practices across digital marketing as we evolved the program and really grew out all of our capabilities there. So, I think that between those two sort of things where it's let's really ramp up what we're doing in a lot of practice areas that propelled me now in my current role towards, hey, let's really, look at how can we experiment, how can we accelerate areas where we're successful, and how can we then, create that as a value for ourselves and for our clients.
Yeah, I think that's a great introduction. But before that, can you walk me through what you were doing before, and how did you get into SEO in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. So, before I got into SEO or really even any kind of digital marketing, I started at U-Haul as my after-school job when I was in high school. I was taking calls in their emergency road service. So basically, if somebody got a flat tire, or they left the lights on the U-Haul, for those who aren't aware, is like rental trucks and trailers primarily is what people think about. They actually own a number of different business lines and are industry leaders in a lot of areas, but the iconic one that you'll see in like Hollywood movies is somebody using their equipment for moving, right? And
Yep.
so you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of pieces of equipment. Eventually, there's something's going to happen, or it's a flat tire, or like I said, somebody left the headlights on, and now the battery's dead by the time they're ready to drive, or various just things like that happen mechanically. And my job was answering the phone and helping get a mechanic out to those people who are having an issue. And then from there, I moved into a general customer service role. And what that gave me over the years that I spent working in those two capacities was just the opportunity to talk to literally hundreds of thousands of customers, right? People who are in a very stressful situation when they're moving, or they're calling us to follow up about what they experienced during that stressful situation, and what may not have gone incredibly well for them. A fair amount of them did call in a compliment. That's definitely something that picked up as we expanded our web presence, was people being able to come in and leave reviews and help us learn more and more of not just the negative side, but their overall user experience. But through all of those conversations, it almost treated me as a master class in marketing, because I definitely wasn't there to defend the company in any way. I was there to help the consumer, and to understand that, like, at the end of each of these figures on a graph or chart, or in that case on a receipt or contract, as a family, it's somebody who's trying to move into a new home, or they're moving to, whether you're moving up in life or you're moving out of necessity, just to have that sort of person to person connection about something, I think has really helped me out in my career. And then while I was going through a number of different roles from customer service that led me into some more senior positions, and got to work on some special projects and help launch remote working, helped come up with some in-house technologies that we use to be able to facilitate sort of remote working and decentralize the need for like one specific call center, as well as help train a lot of the actual store location staff on what were some of the common issues that were being reported, and how could we, basically rectify and do better, things like that. And then help launch a number of other systems and special projects over the years. While I was doing that, of course, I was also, sort of in my own exploratory phase, where I was deciding. The first time I went to college, I didn't finish right away because I didn't really like the degree program that I'd gone down. I was originally a fine arts photography major, and just got, I still love taking pictures, but after apprenticing with some photographers, I learned how much time they spent being basically small business owners. And that made me really reconsider, like, is this worth finishing my degree for something that I feel like isn't teaching me anything about the hard lessons that these people are learning and running their business as photographers? So I was on this journey of discovery. What do I want to do? What do I want to be when I grow up, basically? And I had a good job that was paying the bills, and it was very stable, and it was with a company that wasn't going to go anywhere. It's almost a recession-proof product line that they have there. So it allowed me to go on this journey. And part of that was I liked writing. I liked creating content. I had various different blogs over the years. Sometimes I'd have projects with some friends of mine where we were doing podcasts of our own. This is like 2010, 2011, like no podcast app. You literally had to plug your phone into iTunes on, once a week or whenever you were ready to download the new batch of podcasts and stuff like that. Played a lot of video games, got to know a lot of people on like the community management side of a number of gaming companies, things like that. I was just on this this insatiable curiosity journey, as I kind of knew, I've got a good job, but I really want a career, and what do I want to do? What do I want to get into? And then as I was working on, the podcast with some of my friends, I started to think, okay, we have some goals. We want to get enough listeners that we start to get free stuff for having the show. We'd really love if we had sponsors. Particularly we were looking to get like a beer company to sponsor us, so that then, we were mid to late 20s, think, oh, this would be tremendous if I just got these things for free. We ended up getting, a number of free video games, which is also like my second highest expense at that stage. Behind rent was like, how much was I paying to play video games? And like, we were invited to go to events and knew a lot of people. It was tremendous. But through doing that, I had the goal of like, okay, well, to get there, we need to increase our listeners, right? So then I started learning about basically running ads and doing SEO as an amateur, because I wanted to increase the attention to my podcast, right? So what do we have to do on our WordPress site? How can we start to rank for these terms? What's somebody going to look at in Google that I think they would have an enjoyable experience, or at least would chuckle a little bit and maybe reshare our podcast episodes. And so I was doing that for a couple of years before I got into a position professionally where I could do SEO and SEO related projects. And at that stage, I'm like, oh, hey, I've actually been put in a little bit of sweat equity learning how to do this on my own. Now that I have access to some of the tools that I never would have paid for a license on out of my own pocket, that it really clicked with something in the back of my brain. And this was a really rewarding experience.
Well, that was quite of a learning curve for you. And you said you started in 2010, yeah, doing SEO professionally?
Yeah. It would have been late 2010 or early 2011, I think.
So I would imagine like SEO space looked like very different from what it is now. And could you say, or could you share any particular courses or websites or blogs that help you, to learn more about it? You were saying about WordPress, about starting your own podcast, or anything specific that, helped you to stay current at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the reasons why I started looking in at an amateur level into SEO before I even got the professional opportunity was because, yeah, as you're saying, things looked very different. And I want to say, 2008, 9, 10, like a lot of the people who were approaching me as a site owner for the podcast site or for the different blogs and things like that gave me a very spammy feeling, right? It was a lot of people who I thought I'd just look at their Twitter bio, look at the websites that they were referencing, and thought, oh, this doesn't look good to read as a human. This looks nowadays, oh, this is clearly keyword stuff. We would expect this to not rank. But we still had very spammy tactics that could work to a certain extent, back in those days, white text on a white background and just stuff a bunch of keywords at the bottom of the page, negative 99 pixels, all of these sorts of things. And even then those were, kind of tailing down as I was getting into SEO professionally. But that's what made me start reading around a little bit, is thinking, okay, I don't trust that I could hire anybody, even on the budget that I could, put aside for promotion of these projects I was really passionate about. I just didn't feel like I could trust a number of people who were offering as practitioners, but I found the SEO community and the people who are writing about things. And I just thought, like, this is not something that I see in other areas. I'm not seeing, people write about paid search. There certainly weren't a number of people who were writing as openly about, programmatic when the time came a few years later, things like that. Like, it really seemed unique to SEO. And I remember when I got into it professionally, there was, and I'm blanking on their name right now, but there was like an online certification course that I took as a series of webinars with somebody. And for the stage, they taught me some fairly basic stuff. I mean, I'd say that, where we're at right now and the people that I work with a lot of times on the agency side, like the course that I took was adequate in terms of it taught me the same things that you would learn probably in the first 30 days as an entry-level SEO team member at any agency, right? Here's all the elements of a page. Here's what kind of things to think about. Here's what keywords are and how to go through Google Analytics, things like that. Very, very surface level, but it's obviously targeted at, primarily small and medium businesses, maybe their business owner or their salesperson or something like that, who's only got a finite quantity of hours to put on SEO, but to have a little bit of verbal fluency on some of the core concepts, right? From there, I ended up spending a lot of time reading Moz. I was just voraciously rewatching every Whiteboard Friday that I could as far back as seemed relevant. And now, honestly, part of how I got into SEO was through years of being on Twitter and working with people from the customer angle at U-Haul on Twitter, helping build out Twitter programs and social media overall. And so it was my natural place to go as I started reading, whether I was reading Distilled or Moz, or way back when I was even reading SEO book, just to have like a point counterpoint to some of the folks who are, positive and believed the stuff that Google was saying. And then I started thinking like, well, these people, obviously authorship was a big opportunity that we saw around that same time, right? So there was a number of people who were increasingly doing a better and better job of sharing how to find them online, how to interconnect the people who are authoring a blog post on one of these industry blogs, to find them on Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever. And so I want to say since 2011 or, maybe 2012 at the latest, like I've been using a curated, Twitter list as soon as lists became available. And before that, I was just heavily curating everybody that I could follow on Twitter. to make sure that I was seeing things that were coming up in the news, and not in terms of like wanting to be on the bleeding edge, but because I think that when it's shared by people that you get to know who people are, what they're sharing, what types of things interest them, and then it almost becomes a qualifier in the same sense as like if you have a favorite author, then you know that when their next book comes out, you have an idea whether it's going to, what genre it's going to be in, what it's going to be about, that sort of thing. Even if it's not in a series, you kind of know what to expect. And so when there's people that I follow on Twitter, whether it was their original material or things that they were resharing, then you automatically say like, okay, now I know I need to go through and read this and decide, is this a new input that goes into my RSS feed? Is this something that I circle back to regularly? But just such a voracious appetite for learning more and more about how to apply the digital techniques basically to the things that I already knew from all my years working with customers and understanding the language that customers use and that people use when they're shopping or post-purchase, and how to really then start to interpret that into a way that we can do a better job communicating with our marketing materials online.
Yeah, I would totally sign for that. And actually, I read a book. My first interaction with SEO started back in college here at Seneca in Toronto, and yeah, I read then a book. Do you know Eric Enge, The Art of SEO? That was the turning point for me. And then after that, I started to discover tools that he was talking about, following the blogs, and kind of doing the same as you did. I didn't do curated list. I just followed people that I saw they were like good teachers and kind of had some weight in the space. And actually I'm still doing that to this very day. I open my Twitter feed and see what's happening in the SEO world. And yeah, just going back a little bit to the time when you were working at U-Haul, I think I read in the article in one of your other interviews that U-Haul at the time had 20,000 locations. How did you do a lot of local SEO? Like, what kind of SEO job you were primarily involved from the beginning till the end?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I got into SEO at U-Haul, my job title then was just web analyst, and there was two or three of us that worked as web analysts within, the digital arm of the organization. And I spent a lot of time working with the designers and a fair amount with the developers, but obviously they, were typically heads down unless we were collaborating on a specific project. But whereas the designers were more on terms of like, let's just talk about ongoing trends and what are we seeing from the consumer and how can we ideate new projects to work on. So spend a good amount of time talking with them based on the data and behaviors that we saw on the site. And we got to a stage where I was primarily doing user testing and usability studies, and we were coming up to a regularly scheduled code freeze, right? A lot of businesses have this where you're going into your peak season, so you put a code freeze on because you don't want to break your funnel when you're into the peak season, certainly. So with that coming up, then my boss at the time said, hey, nobody's ever done SEO on our website. Can you take a look at it? And admittedly, at first, I was reluctant because I felt like this wasn't a big enough project. Like, oh, SEO is going to be like 2 or 3 months. I mean, yes, I'm going to do it because I don't have anything else on my plate right now, and I don't want to turn it down. But like, what else can we maybe look forward to in the future? And then I got into it, and I started to analyze our site and started to run crawls and learn about how to run crawls and how to diagnose problems. And if you have a enterprise website that's never had SEO done before, there's also a situation, and if you're like myself and this is your first time doing SEO, there's a situation where you don't know what else you can achieve because you're hopefully doing better than you were doing last year. And a lot of that's just by nature of how the internet was growing year over year, right? And so you think like, what's to say we can do better if we were already an industry leader just because of the brand equity, right? And so there wasn't a playbook on how much better could this get. Certainly there was things that we needed to do in terms of like site health, right? And there was a lot of issues that we had, especially in local, as you highlighted. That became one of the first sort of battlegrounds that we got our arms around, because whereas not a lot of people could beat us for product lines that everybody knew U-Haul was an industry leader in, certainly within local, you weren't just going after how good is your site, how authoritative is your site, but also, centroid bias, where's your brick and mortar compared to where's your user demand at, right? And so we spent a lot of time working on local. You're right, in terms of the quantity of locations there were, and that presents a challenge in and of itself, because then you get into how much can you prioritize or sculpt your listings within a city, particularly when you're working in-house and you think about not every store offering the same services. So then you may have an opportunity in terms of, well, if we've just invested in a brand new store, what can I do to make sure everybody sees that? Certainly, I want the people who it's most convenient for to see it, but I also maybe want to show it off to everybody. If there's a service that we're offering only there because it's a brand new store that we've built and now we have product line expansion, and the other store that is probably also perfectly good and maybe a mile away from you doesn't offer this. So how can I really think about the representation for local across the mix of opportunities that I have within a given, like a DMA or a major city or something like that. One of the things that I talked about when I previously gave a talk on Moz back in 2015, talking about local for enterprise, was that I was definitely lucky that at U-Haul we had a directory listings team. We had a number of people who are professionals in that experience that had a lot of expertise from prior years in terms of auditing the Yellow Pages ads that U-Haul had as one of the largest advertisers, during that era. And then when we pushed for being completely digital, we had people that had that experience were really able to lead and drive what we were doing in terms of directory listings, NAP information, listings management, things like that. Obviously, for a product line like renting a truck or trailer, where the consumer might not even think that they need to go online because they drive by the store all the time and they see the trucks out front, so they just think something's always available. I can just show up whenever and come get it, right? It's almost like you would never conceive of, I need to reserve a shopping cart at a grocery store. Of course, they always have shopping carts at the grocery store, right? And then you get there and you think like, oh, actually, no, these are all reserved. Oh man, that's unexpected, right? But so it's so crucial to have, NAP information that was correct and that was, everything that was wrong with the system for how directory listings and location information was recycled within the ecosystem, and where certain players in the ecosystem could republish what they probably should have known was inaccurate information and things. I'm so thankful that we had a whole team who was working on that. So on my side of things, we had to work on what I was mentioning a few minutes ago about how can we sculpt things? How can we look at, one, our templates on brand.com, and what are we doing there to make sure that we have information that's suitable for the user journey. So when somebody does come in on this as a landing page out of MapPack or from Google Maps app or what have you, that when they come through, that they have a good landing page experience, that it gets them into the funnel. How do we balance the things that we want the user to do on the landing page along with the things that we'd want to do to help that rank within local and regular organic search?
True. So that was a lot of work in terms of analyzing and actually updating those naps and working with the dev team to make those implementations, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to give away any of their secret sauce, but I'd say that one of the things that was an outgrowing of my user testing and web analytics phase was that when we went into SEO, conversion rate optimization was just like a no-brainer. Like doing those two as separate fields is still to this day very foreign to me. I get it that there's a lot of times where you want to think about, oh, this is SEO as a acquisition channel similar to paid search or programmatic, and you just get people to the site and then a whole different team owns what happens on the site. But maybe because I started in-house and I had that same background, it was, of course, I want to attract people to the site, but I want to attract people who are going to have a positive experience, that are going to like what they see. Maybe they're ready to buy today. Maybe they're, if you're renting something to move your whole house, not, that you're on a different timeline, right? In terms of when you're pricing things out versus when you're ready to reserve, all of that. So I need to make sure you have a positive impression so that you come back and you don't, maybe next time instead of going to Google search, you just go right to our website because it's, it's a 5-letter brand name. It's easy to type in. You're going to remember that. So having a great positive experience is part of that. And, I was also lucky that we had a strong culture of testing, lots of A/B testing, tons of testing going on all the time. And because of some of the tools we use and the tests that were going on, I was the type of person who, even if the A/B test was looking at only one change or one particular page in the funnel, I would then still follow through and use the tools that we had to see what that user did when I was going, so if I'm doing a sample set to just make sure the A/B test is firing right and that we're tracking the right data, I just get curious and keep going through and follow those users. And that would lead to some of the best, most profitable discoveries that we found, and one of them was better understanding the impact of seeing a location page at any point within their journey on the website. And that really shaped how we thought about these. So one, it's crucial to have good information that's published for people who are going to actually end up transacting in person. So then the website was, exactly that, like a digital yellow pages at that stage. It was also crucial for having that quality landing page experience for people who are still in the early stages. But also we began to understand the role that page played when maybe you did come through on the home page or an unbranded search. But if at any point you saw a location page and what content you saw on that page, then how that impacted your likelihood to reserve that day or not, really helped us to better understand what we were doing. And it was one of the first cases where I got to this mindset that I later termed as like, my biggest job was helping the company get out of our own way, right? We need to have a quality experience for the user, and then also understand at what point are we overworking this, and do we just seem to let the user accomplish the goals that they set out for themselves?
Totally, yeah. I would agree that testing is very important in SEO, and many would argue that if you don't test, you can do proper SEO because like it always changes and never stays the same. So you need to try and test new techniques. But with that said, it's also impossible to do the test always right? So can you share maybe a story or a test where it didn't go as planned, or like when it failed? It can be anything like content test, CRO, or technical tests.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd say one of the hardest lessons to learn, and one of the things that I'd recommend everybody try this early on in your testing career. Run an AA test, right? Like make sure that your infrastructure is set up correctly, no matter whether you're using
Sorry to
whatever
jump in.
technology you're using to.
Can you
Yeah.
elaborate a little bit on AA test? What that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So like if we're thinking about a typical A/B test would be like, oh, let's A/B test different text on this button, or let's A/B test different, call to action or headlines. An AA test would be, let's do that, but have the two variants be identical and make sure that the way that we're running the test is actually evenly split. Because you would imagine that like, okay, if I'm going to if I'm going to A/B test the text on the button and see which text gets people to click the button more often, and I know that I'm going to get, just for simple math, 1,000 visits this week. Ideally, I want to make sure 500 see variant A, 500 see variant B, and I believe that I have an established conversion rate for variant A because it's the one that's already up there, right? So I guess I should say control instead of variant. But then you run an A/B test and you think that all the math is correct, but you should probably first, at least once run an AA test. And so you're going through everything, but there is no variant. They're both identical, and then see, are your conversion rates actually the same afterwards, or do you figure out that, were you even able to get to be 500 and 500? Is your technology, maybe the first 500 of the day are all seeing the control and the second 500 see the variant, and then that's gotten into the impact of like day parting and what the consumer is doing throughout the day? Or sometimes you just realize that you don't even really necessarily have as steady as you thought conversion rate on the control. So basically it's just to go through the steps and make sure that everything that you're doing for your AB or your multivariate testing is actually going to give you reliable math. So do an AA test to make sure that everything is set up there and that there's no obvious gaps. Because if you run the AA test and it comes out that you have a 5% difference in conversion rate between two of the things that are actually identical to the user, then you figure out you have to go back through and retool your testing methodology. And I'd say the second piece of advice is then something that I thought was always obvious before, but I'd say definitely over the last few years working across a lot of different projects. There's a lot of people who are taking statistical significance for granted. It should be available somewhere in the library on Moz, but I know there was a MozCon talk, I want to say 2014, maybe 2013, 2014. Kyle Rush gave a talk at MozCon, and he spoke about a lot of the conversion testing that he did when he was working for political campaigns, for U.S. presidential campaigns, where they just had, so many visits coming through, so much site traffic that they constantly had to have a series of tests queued up because they were going to hit statistical significance in a very short window of time. But I see a lot of people who get into testing and they're more concerned about the dates and less concerned about when they've actually hit statistical significance. And I understand, you have projects, you have developer queues and time available, things like that. But you need to make sure that it's rooted in statistical significance when you're going through this, so that you can believe that these tests are reliable, especially if there's the likelihood that you're going to then layer additional tests on that assumption later on. So if going back to the example, if I'm A/B testing a button, I need to make sure that I'm hitting that, statistical significance, that I'm confident in which one's the winner out of that, because then a month or a quarter or a year from now, I might want to test the headline on that page. And I need to know that I have, secure data, things that I'm sure about. Sorry, not secure, things that I'm sure about when I'm testing on that. So I'm not just layering, maybe a false assumption on top of another false assumption.
That is actually a great piece of advice. I actually never done, I think, in a way like a AA test as you described, only A/B tests, and specifically just showing the different pages for different buttons or different layouts to different groups of people. But yeah, that's something that I'll if you have some information about that and you can share after, it'll be very appreciated. And also, another thing I wanted to ask you, from your experience, you've been working in U-Haul and it's like in-house, right? And now you're at OMG, it's more like a client side. Which one you prefer better, or like what's the difference from your view?
Oh yeah, man. I mean, that's a great question, and it's one that I often ask people now when they're interviewing to join the team at the agency side, if I see that they have in-house experience, and I'll ask them the same thing. Obviously, it varies based on where you're at. I was at U-Haul for a number of years, so I have in-depth experience at one particular client, and now in-depth experience at one particular agency. So certainly, there's people who've been at multiple agencies and been exposed to multiple different sets of culture. Likewise, people who've who've been in-house and worked at different places. So your mileage may vary. But the way I felt about it was they can both be very, very stressful, very fast paced. Like, to my mind, there's not this, like, a lot of people who are working agency side have a goal of getting in-house because they feel like there's less work to do in-house. Things are slower, work-life balance, things like that. Obviously, I think those are important wherever you're at, to fit it, to work somewhere that you feel is rewarding, somewhere that's mentally stimulating, ticks all the boxes that you want in your own career. I would say that when on the agency side where I'm at right now, I love that I'm able to consistently work on different projects for different clients across a whole lot of verticals, and that I'm able to then have somewhat of the challenge of, hey, if I'm able to get something that works, maybe I'm doing a lot of video SEO for a client that's in CPG. How can I transfer these same principles over to an auto client or a hospitality client or a pharma client? Like, how can I take what I know in one area and apply it in another, and then learn all the nuances of that new niche against the set of skills that I already have, right? And in that way, it's also, to my mind, a little bit like when you take increasingly difficult math courses going throughout school, right? You're building on everything that you know. You're still using algebra and elements of geometry all throughout, even through calculus and things like that, right? So, how can I take what I already know, apply it in a different shape, and then learn some new nuances and things like that? So obviously, when you're in-house, there's very few companies you can work at. When I was at U-Haul, we did have quite a few product lines, so I had some of that similar experience, but certainly not to the scale of working for an agency, and certainly in my current position where I'm overseeing our whole practice and get to interface with a lot of brilliant SEO people who are working on a whole multitude of clients and get into the weeds about that sort of project. Also, I think, in terms of access to different tools, I think, the situation is just that, at an agency, we're expected to be experts on a number of tools and to have a POV about what tools we recommend and what tools do we use and bring to bear for our clients. And I think when you're in-house, obviously that process is a lot slower or a lot less frequent. You probably have not necessarily switching costs per se, but it's certainly a whole process if you wanted to switch out one tools platform for another, and the costs that are baked into legacy data that you may have within a given tool or things like that. So I think that's also a benefit. But on the flip side, the benefit of in-house, when I was in-house, I was definitely working on something where I was directly contributing to the company that I own stock in, right? Not to say that you aren't at an agency, but obviously it's it's a little bit more tangible when you're working in-house, especially if you're there for a number of years, and you start to feel like I'm really helping to build something that is creating jobs, something that has a physical footprint. I can go out and touch our product. I can go visit our stores. I have friends who are using our brands, things like that.
Yeah, totally. Actually, I never worked in-house. I only worked in Omnicom for the last 4.5 years, and yeah, I like the vibe, and if I can say, like, working on different clients, because each and every client, it's each and every specific niche, and you can get to know, like, a lot how this business works and how to do like how to test things. It's exactly how you said. You can produce one video for one client, and then you start thinking about, okay, how can I apply it for another client, and that is quite an interesting process for me too. uh, Also, now you're a director at SEO and OMG. And can you tell us now, what are your day-to-day duties? I wouldn't imagine that you are going and changing title tags and meta descriptions. So if you can, yeah, share a little bit of more details about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I should put that on my New Year's resolution to like go through and do some more title tags and stuff like that. Definitely, when I joined Omnicom, I was fortunate enough to join already in a management position, so I did set that out for myself as a task. I joined in August of 2016, and I said, okay, by the end of this year, calendar year, I need to have soloed one of every type of project that we do, at least for the clients that I was working with, everything that was in scope for them. I need to do at least one of these on my own, so then I know how to manage people. I know what to expect out of them, what work goes into it, things like that, right? This goes back to one of the early people that I met in my career, but there was somebody who told me once upon a time, you shouldn't change the work until you know the work, right? So what are we doing right now? I need to be able to put myself in that person's shoes so that I can help better lead them, which I think is a really key thing, thinking about leadership versus management. And it's still something that I recommend anytime we bring in a new team leader, new manager, is like, you need to, go through, even if you've done this at another agency or elsewhere in your career, like, let's go through the paces, understand everything that goes into these work types, especially because as a team lead, you should be informing how are we continuing to refine that product going forward, right? I also believe that, we as a group in the US, we have, a few dozen different SEO people across several cities. I believe it's important that we hear inputs from everybody, right?
True.
So part of my job is fostering the community that we have. I do that through me being connected one-on-one with all of the team leads, working on a ton of new business and partnering with them. So I don't have a team that just does new business SEO. We're working with the teams that would potentially be working on the account or that are working on other accounts for us at each agency, so that I'm having more one-on-one time with them in terms of how are they thinking about SEO. We're collaborating on brand new clients that neither one of us have ever worked on, sometimes in verticals that we don't have an active client on. So we're deep diving on a lot about the vertical as well as the client at that, or the potential client at that time. And I'm learning about them and their thought process and their marketing style and everything throughout. And then we also have a number of things that we do to foster the community, such as monthly events, newsletters, different technology that we use to collaborate and communicate. Because it just makes sense that if there's 30 plus of us, or 40 plus or however many, like it's a very small number of people where I could say everything I learn and choose to share with them is all they need to learn. I think you get above 2 people and you suddenly realize like there's much more, like the wisdom of the commons versus just me saying what everybody needs to know. But I am happy to use my position as a megaphone to celebrate the success of everybody on the team when we do create something that's really neat or unique, when we get great feedback from a client, and likewise when we get clients asking us questions that normally wouldn't fall within what somebody else might define as SEO, but we break it down and think, oh, this actually is about consumer intent, or this is about how's our content doing in terms of meeting the goals that our customers want, or our potential customers want. How good are we at helping them understand what we have available and how we can provide them, how can our clients solve the situations that's driving a user to go to search and look for something. So when we have those situations, and I'm able to share that across the agencies through different agency leadership, and bring recognition to our team members who are doing really great work. I mean, that's one of the most rewarding parts of my day to day. So, I'd say that it's a pretty even split between new business? What are we doing in terms of existing clients for refining deliverables or creating new projects and new products to offer to them? And then just helping to do the knowledge sharing across teams and across channels.
Yeah, the knowledge sharing is really important, and it helps to, kind of align everyone from the team to on the new practices. And as we were spoken before, the industry is changing, and everybody's input is valuable, especially if you're genuinely interested in. I myself, like, I always share like stuff that I find something new. Like, for instance, like, have you heard about the recent update from Google that they're planning to tie CLS score to the page speed algorithm and add that what's called badge in the Google SERPs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of stuff around like core web vitals that's a great example where I've said like, hey, I think I have an understanding on this, but I really want 2 or 3 team members to help me with this because I recognize that that's an opportunity for some curious and ambitious members of our team to really plant a flag for themselves and build their future reputation as far as one for this particular situation, if it turns out to be as big as I think it could be over the next 12 to 18 months, but 2, just in terms of being somebody who can understand and quickly digest, upcoming changes based on a very few set of signals and help us craft an action plan. Like, it's very easy to share the news, and it's definitely one thing that we never, as a culture, we absolutely abhor fear mongering, right? So like the whole
Mm-hmm.
concept of like mobile-geddon was just repulsive to me. I mean, obviously, I understood the it's almost like an ends justifies the means thing, right? Because I think all of us at this stage could say the hype about calling it mobilegeddon was so much worse than the impact to anybody who did nothing about it, right? But what it did was it got so many people to actually take the advice that had been out there for years and fix the mobile version of their site and stop having really bad mobile experiences for users. But I don't think, there's only so many times you can cry wolf, in my opinion, right?
Sure.
So while we're looking at core web vitals, I think it's very important to say, here's where we're at. Here's what we think could be the repercussions if you don't do this. Obviously, here's what we've known from previous updates and things like that. But to do it in a way where we're going to create an action plan and give something positive to the clients and in our discourse with our team members. It may in the end cost me the ability, like maybe I could fearmonger and get more clients, or certainly when we're looking at a big enough agency, we have clients who don't have SEO active, either because they have it with another agency and it's just not active with us, or they feel like they just don't understand the value of it, and I'm still trying to work them on a journey of client education on that, and like what else we could do by integrating SEO with the other channels that they do have active. So maybe in some of those cases I could say, ooh, there's a big Google update coming, you really need us. But that's not how you build a fruitful relationship or a relationship based on trust. Like, it has to be, here's what we think we can offer for you and where we can really help you. And maybe that's part of me just going back on my previous experience in my life of, creative, working as a photographer and thinking about this where I wanted to go for my career. Was one of those things, like, it's a picture, you can see it, you either like it or you don't, and there's no moral or value-based judgment on whether you do or don't like something. That's how art works. But I can't explain to you why you should like this art, the same as I can't explain to you why you as a brand should want to give your users a better experience. That should be relevant, that either you care about them and you want to help them and you want to be known as a brand that helps people, or you just want to be a brand that squeezes everything you can out of anybody who's foolish enough to not immediately close your website.
True. Now we've talked a lot about like how you help build a team and how you manage it. But what would you suggest to someone who wants to join your team, or just in general, like in a junior SEO role? What would be the qualities that you'd be looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So 98% of my answer to this question is going to be go look up Ruth Burr-Reedy's article on how to hire and how to interview. I think she's done this a few different times over the years, previously when she was at Moz, and then at the agency she's currently at. I'm not sure if she published it on their site or if she published it as a guest on Moz, but I owe her a lot of credit for really encapsulating the ideas that I had around how to do good hiring, right? And at this stage in my career, I've interviewed thousands of people, hired several dozens, maybe into hundreds of people over the years, and I think in my mind I've had 2, maybe 3 legitimately bad hires. right? And one of them was the first person I ever hired, and that's what made me really deep dive into how can I better think about this sort of thing. And what I've landed on was there's really three qualities that I'm looking for when hiring somebody. You have to be able to write well, right? Yeah, the concept that there's people who work in SEO and can't write a good meta description, or they think that they're an SEO writer, not an actual writer. I mean, we all wrote numerous essays going through school.
Hmm.
Maybe you didn't enjoy it, whatever. But if you're in marketing and you don't have the ability to turn a phrase or to work on a headline or a tagline or something like that, like I don't know, go back and read the classics. Go read like your Ogilvy, or I know that Will Reynolds gave a talk a number of years ago about like J. Walter Thompson and several of the other like classic ad people from the 1800s and things like that. Like go back and read the classics on how to write an ad and think about why is that really different than a page description or a meta description on a page title, right? Or a
True.
product description with how important Amazon and other retail SEO is right now. Like you have to be able to write. That's number one. And also how much do we spend time writing for our clients, right? Whether you're creating decks or writing POVs or just emailing them back, like the ability to communicate quickly, provide certainty, provide reassurance, and demonstrate the appropriate level of expertise without boring your audience. Like that's to me the number one skill. Number two is analytical thought process. A lot of people get turned off when I talk about math, but I really do believe whether you think about it, whether you think it's this way or not, a lot of the work that we do in SEO is, some form around, of doing math, basically, right? Sometimes somebody will listen to this and tell me that it's not actually calculus, but that's like the shorthand in my head for thinking about the area under a curve. But a lot of the work that we're doing, you have to have an analytical thought process. You have to, some of this comes with experience. This is what a lot of entry level SEO is, in my opinion, is you need to be exposed to a lot of data so that you can develop the pattern recognition, in your subconscious, right? When you're doing like an IQ test or something like that, and you're just seeing these shapes, and you can either sit there and really pick them apart, figure out which one's which. If it's like, here's three shapes in a series, pick out what the fourth one will be, or you just get to that point where it's like, okay, my subconscious mind is telling me this is the answer, and that's like your pattern recognition skills. I had a number of folks who interned with us previously as web analysts over the years, and this would be like a real make or break point for them. Is like, can you quickly build up pattern recognition skills? If you're being tasked with doing weekly reporting and you're just pulling data out of the source and throwing it into the Excel or into SQL, Tableau, however we're going to be reporting out on this, and all you see yourself is data processing, and you're never once asking why does the data behave in this way? What are the consumers doing differently on Monday versus Tuesday versus Sunday? Then you don't realize that suddenly Mondays on a given week, Monday might be 5 times what it normally should be. And this is legitimately a situation we've run into where it's like the tool may overcount things, it may double count some things, or we've had in the past situations where like one out of several servers didn't report into the tool that day. But if you don't recognize the pattern, then you don't know when we're collecting bad data. So we're going to down the stream make different marketing decisions based on bad data because nobody early on spotted that this was an aberration to the pattern. And likewise, how do you know whether we should test certain things or not if you're not familiar with what's the current landscape? So writing well, having that analytical thought process, really understanding, one, what is the current data telling me? And two, why is the current data telling me that? And how can I start to tweak it and get closer to the goals that I want to accomplish? And then the third one was a little bit vague, but basically you have to internet, right? You need to be somebody who uses everybody should. It's very tough to find somebody right now who doesn't internet, but I have worked with people in the past and interviewed others in the past who just they never did any online shopping. They didn't create any content of their own. That they had like a LinkedIn page because their school told them that you should have a LinkedIn because interviewers will look at your LinkedIn. Definitely everybody needs to live the life that's genuine to themselves. But it's important to have a diverse set of inputs and a team that's able to empathize with the consumer and the audience, not just be identical to everybody else that's on your team. But you still need to be able to empathize with some sector of our consumer, right? Whether you're a user of the product that your client or your company is selling or not, you still need to be able to understand the general online shopping consumer journey, right? From, hey, I have this need, I'm going on a journey of discovery. Okay, now I've got a consideration set, all of that sort of thing. And even if you're not working on a on a D2C client or any client that does retail or sells anything, there's still a similar journey for, for if you're just running your own blog. What's the reason anybody should come and land on this blog? And what's it matter if I'm writing more articles if I don't know why anybody should come here? So having that sort of being able to put yourselves in the shoe of the user. And I think I'm on the extreme end of things. I'm actually super interested, especially if you're coming in for an entry level or other junior position where you maybe haven't had an opportunity to work on a ton of different projects professionally. I think it's very interesting to me to hear about somebody who is creating their own content. You might sort of cringe when you think about like the blog that you wrote in college, and it's not your greatest writing, and you were just expressing yourself and whatever. But if you maintained a blog for any period of time, I'm impressed by creating your own site. What have you done on there? What's your journey of learning how to manage your own site, your own content strategy? What have you done to put things up on there? Likewise, I think one of the things that we talked about before is like, if you have a considerable amount of karma on Reddit, I'm also impressed by that, because then that says you're able to quickly jump into a community, understand, the values and what's going on there. And then how can I create something that's going to resonate with this community, right? I think obviously there's a lot of different corners you could go to on Reddit, but within that overall thing, there's still a lot of marketing skills that people are developing without recognizing it, because this is something they're doing as a hobby.
That's an interesting part about Reddit. Never heard it before, but I find myself sometimes under not even my name, but on Quora, just my nickname. I'm answering the digital marketing questions sometimes, and the recent one was I got blocked on an Instagram. I think I got a shadow ban, and I started like doing all the actions, like complaining on Facebook and trying to unblock it. I read everything I could on the internet. Seems like it was just a hole or a glitch in the Facebook code or an Instagram code. And once I figured it out, after 10 complaints, I've written a small explanation how to do it, with the step-by-step process, and that helped to unblock 10 accounts to some people. So yeah, I get what you're saying with Reddit. It's fun. So just to sum it all up, it's just writing skills, like marketing copy. Then it's like being a good communicator and having analytical skills, just kind of to showcase your ability to analyze and present this data in a clear and concise way. And the third one was, can I say, to be curious, to do, you said do internet, right?
Basically. And I probably need to come up with an easier brandable way to put that, but yeah, really be able to get into the shoes of the target audience, right? So like I said, you could be working on a client for, let's say, for example, you're working on a jeweler client, right? Somebody who does really amazing diamond rings.
Mm-hmm.
How often is any one person going to be, in that shopping journey? But you should be able to understand everything that somebody's going through, not just academically. Maybe you're not buying diamond rings all the time, but maybe you are. You are certainly doing occasional, mid to high level purchases for yourself, right? And so you can think about what was I doing when I'm buying, when I'm buying a brand new sofa, when I'm conceiving about, do I want to get a new car this year or something like that? And you're going through that shopping journey for something in terms of that. And I know that maybe there's somebody who works for a diamond ring company right now that's listening, and I apologize that I just compared your product to sofas, but maybe we can agree to disagree.
Yeah, just for the sake of example, I think it's good and it's funny. So another question I wanted to ask you. Now we've talked about in-house SEO, agency SEO. Do you still have some personal projects or any projects that you've done throughout your life, and not even in the beginning, but maybe later in the day, or you do some consulting work and something that stood out to you, some interesting experience that you've got doing that?
Yeah, I mean, when I started in SEO, nearly 10 years ago at this stage, there was a saying, and I'm sure it goes back quite a ways, but the saying was, if SEO doesn't freelance, you should fire them. And the concept, I understood it when I was working at U-Haul. This is a website that brought in a ton of, even before, like I said, even before we started fixing the SEO and the conversion rate optimization, they were already industry leaders in what they did. So it brought in a lot of revenue and a lot of leads, and it was a touch point for a lot of customers before we even started, quote unquote, fixing it. So I shouldn't be using that as my sandbox to learn SEO. I should be doing it on other sites. And even when I've been a team lead, I've been known in the past to say, look, I have a unlimited hosting account with DreamHost, which shout out DreamHost. I've had them for almost a decade now. I have an unlimited hosting account. So tell me what you want your website to, what you want your domain to be. Buy the domain, or I'll buy the domain, whatever, and I'll register it and host it on here. And then you go out and build a site and test all your chops, like create a WordPress site, write about things, learn, test everything out. I definitely believe everybody should have some sort of sandbox. Where I'm at right now in the position that I have, admittedly, I'm not 100% sure about the rules in terms of me freelancing, but what I've done over the last few years is rather than paying clients of my own, I just work with nonprofits that I believe in, and offer them, my advice and my time, and chat with them about things. I think, that's any area where we can donate our time and our skills is going to be tremendous. So I think that, opportunities like that are something that I'm grateful to have, where I'm still able to, like we highlighted early in the conversation, I'm not spending a lot of my time these days rewriting page titles and meta descriptions, and a lot of the really hands-on keyboard things. So I do enjoy it when I have the opportunity to do something like that, or make those types of recommendations for a cause or for an organization that I believe in.
Makes sense. And that concludes the main part. Now I'd like you to ask some couple questions, and this is the part that I call Digital Acumen Blitz. I will ask you a short question, but your answer shouldn't be necessarily short, but you can try. So are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
So the first one, is SEO dead?
Oh man, SEO is dead. Long live SEO, right? I mean, I think the I'm actually working on a case study right now. Like, the classics still work a lot of times, but if you're in a competitive vertical, the classics aren't enough to get you where you need to go. You really need to be about where's the consumer going to go this year, next year, so forth, right? So in that aspect, like, we need to always be learning, and we should always be killing what we've been doing before in favor of something that's new and better for the for the consumer.
All right, I'll take that. Ahrefs or SEMrush?
Oh man, SEMrush or SEMrush. I'll leave the pronunciation debate up to them. But yeah, I've known a number of people that work there. One of them actually bought me lunch on my birthday when we were at an event a few years ago. So I mean, Ahrefs is a fantastic tool set, and I do like some of the unique data that they have. But I would say that tomorrow I'll be in SEMrush, I'm sure, at some point.
Gotcha. Yeah, I have both accounts as well, and thanks actually for sharing SEMrush with us. I hope nobody is against that in our company. So yeah, a most important SEO skill.
Oh my gosh, most important SEO skill, I would say, has to be, this is going to sound cheesy, but the ability to learn, right? You have to be somebody who really welcomes and feels, like when you think about the Maslow's hierarchy and you get to self-actualization, like if you feel self-actualization when you're learning something and you're gaining new skills, or you're creating insights for yourself, like that to me, it says you're on the right track with SEO. After that, I guess going back to the previous answer would be writing skills.
I'll take that too. Buying links or earning links?
Oh man, earning links. Earning links. I don't buy links, and I catch a lot of flack for saying I don't build links. I build companies, right? Like you earn links, create great content, work with the other channels that are amplifying your content, and just earn links. We've proven it. It can happen, and it's the best way to do it.
Great. Starting a site from scratch or buy an expired domain and with some authority and build it from there?
Oh, that's a good one. I don't know that I have not in recent years purchased an expired domain to try to capture that, so I don't really have an informed opinion on that. The old school SEO in me, when the early on in my career in SEO was when we came into like Panda and Penguin, and we were seeing a number of SEO agencies were being de-indexed for a while as like paying the price for their previous habits in buying links. And I always felt that I was lucky that when I was at U-Haul, I was, in 2010, 2011, getting into SEO, working on an enterprise level website. I was lucky, count myself lucky that nobody in the previous years had bought links when they thought they could fly under the radar, right? Like I could
Mhm.
just imagine toiling away on the site and finding progress and then being penalized for something that happened a decade earlier. So that's still in the back of my mind anytime I think about starting a new project. And so I probably always default to start fresh. But if somebody has recent data on how you can do that, safely and to a great extent, I'll absolutely applaud them.
Cool. And the last one, which hat will suit you more, white hat or gray hat?
Oh man, I mean, I have to be white hat. I have to say, we're still orienting towards what can we do today that is going to benefit us 5 years from now, right? Or I guess to say it the other way, 5 years from now, our jobs will be different. We all know that, right?
Hmm.
So what can we start doing today that we'll be doing in the future anyways? And to me, that has to be white hat, right? That has to be what are we doing to orient towards the best value for the audience, for the consumer? How can we sometimes we anticipate things that aren't, maybe it's not even considered white hat because it's not something that seems like it'll be rewarded today, but it's towards the goals of serving the consumer, the search user in a better manner. And we expect that eventually Google and the consumer will catch up with us.
Got it. And yeah, that was fun. And the very last question, and I promise, and I'll stop torturing you. Where do you see yourself in 5 years and in general SEO?
Oh man, that's a terrific question. I mean, at some stage in the near to mid future, I'd love to work at another one of our offices globally. I really love the team that I work with in New York and across the U.S. But I think one of the advantages of working for a large agency or holding company overall is the presence that they have globally. So I think that would serve me really well in terms of my future career path to get some experience working in another market and working with teams there and help me get a little bit more well-rounded. Um, in terms of where SEO will be in 5 years, I mean, I think what we're going to see is that the medium will continue to change, right? I think 5 years ago, who among us could have necessarily predicted some of the more recent trends in Google and things like that?
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know that too many people in 2011, 12 would have thought about featured snippets, right?
True.
And definitely I think it's funny when we think about image search and how Google understands what's in a picture. And you go back to some of the things that we forgot about. I remember you know, around when I started in SEO, there was an interview with Matt Cutts where he said Google was about 10 years away from understanding everything that's in a picture and being able to recommend products. And now that's like a feature that we take for granted on Pinterest and Google and like shoppable images and being able to understand what's in a picture or at least infer it other than having to have it tagged. But it's still, we see very fundamental, SEO fundamentals still play an important role. And I think a lot of times if you're diagnosing why did I drop, why, whatever, and you find out that somebody at a different given website hasn't really got their fundamentals locked in, that's still going to continue to my mind to be there. As search engines get smarter and better at crawling and understanding what's in there, there's still going to be a space to be rewarded for covering the fundamentals. Or as I think about in terms of marketing, when people think about like the Moz blog, for example, which I think is still, a quality website to read, but as each of us gets more and more experienced in the industry, we probably feel like a lot of the articles are like more and more basic, and it's not. It's that we ourselves have matured and gained understanding, and there's, to my mind, I say that there's always more money at the base of the pyramid, right? When you think
Hmm.
about like there's always this year is always going to be somebody's first year doing SEO, somebody's first year doing any kind of marketing, digital or otherwise, right? And so there's always going to be people like that need to receive the fundamentals. And I think that's going to be the same way for clients. And I think search engines have to take that into account, that even at this stage, when SEO has been around for over 2 decades, how many brand websites actually have sound SEO, right? And so thinking about what's the graph for, percent of websites with good SEO practices in place over time, search engines are still going to have to accommodate quite a few people. It's almost like for a long time, search engines still had, or websites still had to be ready for somebody who was running Internet Explorer 6 because you didn't want to lose out on a sale or a lead because you were expecting a more modern web standard and somebody still had an old client installed from the 90s or something. So there's always going to be room at the base of the pyramid for that sort of thing. But if we stay true to serving what people want and keep our eyes open to where's the ability to leverage a new technology, not just for the sake of it being shiny and new and being first. I know a lot of times in the agency side of things overall, there's like a joy in telling clients, oh, we're the first one to do XYZ activation. It's more important to be the best ones to do it than to be the first one, I think. But your SEO team should absolutely be a place where they can, really drive that state of digital intelligence, right? Because knowing what people are looking for online doesn't just have to tell you how to rank your website on a set of Google results, but it also tells you what's the language our consumers are using, right? There's a client of ours who's no longer a client, so I can't really share the brand name, but I get along really well with the brand manager. And it's unfortunate that we aren't able to still work together, but we worked with them on a campaign, and I promise, I know this was supposed to be short, but I'll wrap it up soon. We worked with them on a campaign in 2018 for which they won awards in 2019. And so shout out to them if you're listening for all the great awards work. But it really started on a journey from one of the first SEO analysis projects we did for them way back in 2013, 2014. And we kept working with them on it. And they were like a little bit reluctant, a little bit slow to hear us tell them, hey, your tagline says X, but your consumers are always searching for Y instead. Like it was literally, to our mind, thinking about the difference between synonyms and why is it that Google can sometimes understand synonyms and find them to be interchangeable, and other times they feel like it's a real change in intent or a real inflection point, right? And we were able to, over years of showing this to them, we backed it up with data, and we got them not only to make the change on their website, but once they made the change on their website, they saw both the response in Google, but also response in consumer behaviors and sales. And we were actually able, from an SEO insight, to get them to change the wording on their packaging and their overall campaign tagline and everything to be better aligned with the words that their target audience was using when they turned to search. And so I think that type of work is where we can, as I said, get SEO to be an SEO or a search intel layer across everything you're doing. That can be, like I said, that could be TV. That's, in this client's case, they were doing it on their packaging, and they won awards for the fact that this came from a digital insight, and they layered it across so many different touch points. I think that should really start to think about SEO beyond just what are we doing on page or on a website, and obviously the interaction between paid and organic search, and how do we integrate things holistically there, where I think our agency is doing a tremendous job. But also, how do you start to think about the fact that about the consumer, what they're people tell Google things that they wouldn't tell their best friend or their mom, right? So how can we leverage that in a ethical and productive way to help people and help brands speak the language that their consumers are looking for, so that people don't have to do 3 or 4 searches to get to a good result that solves the situation they find themselves in?
I think that's a great example, and thanks for such an extended answer. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you today, Ryan, and helping me to produce my first ever podcast episode, and appreciate taking the time to share what you've learned over the years with us. If you want to share any useful links with me, which we briefly discussed today, I'll make sure to include them in the description. And thanks again for taking a chance to talk to me today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here on the first episode. I look forward to many more in this series. And thank you so much for these really great questions.
And that does it for today. Hope you've liked an episode, and if you have any additional questions for me or our guest, please do not hesitate to reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn or Facebook. Simply Google my first and last name and you should be able to see profile links. If you liked an episode, please do subscribe to the Moments in Marketing podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thank you.